You're listening to The Choice FM, where it doesn't matter where you come from, but where we can go together. The show will start in a moment. Hello, and welcome to The Choice FM podcast for January 16th, 2018. I'm FD Gifford, and I will be your host for the next 15 or so minutes. Now, if you are new, I hope this show will soon become a favorite. And if you get some value from our regular broadcast, please hit the subscribe button so you will be notified of our next episode release. As you may or may not know, the Choice FM podcast is my primary broadcast vehicle and is hoped to be only a part of the YWNH Media Company. Those of you who are new to the community, this show is intended to be distributed at least once a week, more than likely more often. And I plan to cover the important topics of our time and how they impact our daily life and lifestyle from a health and wealth perspective. The Choice FM content is a combination of reporting news and information as found and determined by the show's editors, along with their review and commentary. I invite you to join me each episode, share the broadcast with your friends and family, post comments, and maybe someday join us on air, either as a caller or a guest. Now let's kick off the show. This week's topic, I call it theme of personal interest or choice, is the risk of electromagnetic fields, or EMF exposure. To be quite honest, this idea literally flashbacked across my eyes last Saturday, January 13th, when I turned on the cable news to watch the narrative coming out from Hawaii. You know, the one where everybody's cell phone blasted the Armageddon message about the incoming ballistic missile attack, and this is not a drill. It made me wonder, how does one prepare for an incoming ballistic missile attack in 10 or 20 minutes? Not to mention all the radiation exposure that accompanies the blast, if you do survive. The fact is, this is not the first time in my life that I've had to contemplate the idea of dying from radiation exposure. I guess this is all part of life as a baby boomer. At the risk of dating myself, I will admit I am a product of the 50s and was raised to duck and cover if and when I was told or I saw a mushroom cloud in the neighborhood. We were taught to believe we had strong and safe school buildings, since they were all marked as fallout shelters. Remember these fallout signs everywhere? Like most schools in small towns back then, we had regular drills. We had fire drills and fallout drills that sent us home to record when we left school and when our mom saw us at home. No time to play today. We were practicing the "we're all going to die" drill today, I remember like it was yesterday. The teacher explained that this drill, instead of lining up and walking orderly to the playground fence like the fire drills, we were to line up when the bell rang, and each of us was handed a paper note with the time on it from our principal. We were instructed to walk immediately and directly home. About a 4-minute walk for me, while I do remember others had more than double that time to get home. No stops, no play. Just get this note in the hands of our parent or guardian. Then the time was recorded and the note was returned to our teacher the next day. Talk about entraining the children to follow orders. Do this or you may die because you were exposed to the radiation from an incoming USSR bomb. We learned quickly that if the bomb doesn't kill you, you would wish it had after the radiation poison kicks in. These drills, unfortunately, like most other false flag events, only make the victims grow cynical. The problem, as I see it, is with most, like our most recent Hawaii false flag event, is twofold. It trains us through repeated trauma, as the baby boomers experienced, to just follow orders and don't ask questions, or it makes us cynical and not believe to trust our leaders when the real exposure is affecting our lives. But what is the real radiation exposure that we face? Enter the EMF bombarding our lives every day. That's the story that popped into my head after the flashback ended. And here is what I found and want to share with you today. Like most of us, that begins with a visit to the wiki for a common narrative on EMFs. What I found is this: an electromagnetic field, also known as an EMF or EM field, is a physical field produced by electrically charged objects. It affects the behavior of charged objects in the vicinity of the field. The electromagnetic field extends indefinitely throughout space and describes the electromagnetic interaction. It is one of the four fundamental forces of nature. The others are gravitation, weak interaction, and strong interaction. Under the health and safety section of the wiki, it continues, quote, "The potential health effects of very low frequency EMFs surrounding power lines and electrical devices are the subject of ongoing research and a significant amount of public debate. The U.S. National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health and other U.S. government agencies do not consider EMFs a proven health hazard. The National Institute for Occupational Health and Safety and Health has issued some cautionary advisories, but stresses that the data are currently too limited to draw good conclusions." End quote. The potential effects of electronic magnetic fields on human health vary widely depending on the frequency and intensity, end quote, they say. Okay, that semi-technical information filled my head with even more terms to inquire about, such as low frequency versus high frequency, or intensity of EMFs. And let's define health hazard versus health effects. And shouldn't we know that it's obvious that low frequency would generally be perceived as better than high frequency radiation? So I won't bore you with the details on those definitions. More informative is the recommended EMF frequency, in terms of exposure, right? Quote, "The technical literature is conflicted regarding EMF exposure and health effects, according to the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill position statement on EMF radiation concerns. Their statement suggests that the current known sources of EMF exposure include ELF, something called extremely low frequency, cell and mobile phones, wireless networks, smart meters, and microwave devices. It also is providing that, quote, "the electromagnetic radiation is in the frequency range of 50 to 60 hertz from the typical power line, through the RF range, wireless networks that is, between 2.4 and 5.8 gigahertz, up to 300 gigahertz in a microwave device." This position paper also provides us with information concerning where and whom sets our guidelines. This is an interesting group of regulatory and other interest groups, and it reads as follows. Quote, "Exposure limits for radio frequency radiation have been established by the FCC, or Federal Communications Commission, the Occupational Health and Safety Administration, OSHA, and various state regulatory organizations. Additionally, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers and the International Commission of Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection and the World Health Organization, the WHO, and the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists, who have established guidelines for exposure to RF radiation, according to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. This position statement also suggests there is a conflict of data, which leaves us with no clear exposure limit. The following quote supports this. Quote, "While there is no federally developed national standard for safe levels of exposure to radio frequency, or RF energy, It goes on to say, quote, many federal agencies have addressed this important issue. In addition to the FCC, federal health and safety agencies such as the Environmental Protection Agency and the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, and the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, as they said, and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration have been actively involved in monitoring and investigating issues related to RF exposure, end quote. That's great. We have a general idea that these devices are reportedly what they admit, but we can only learn that there are concerns giving rise to investigations. What is if it's not, we don't really know what it is, then is it a hazard? So again, what is that definition of a health hazard? It's a danger to health resulting from exposure to environmental pollutants. They say such as asbestos or ionizing radiation or lifestyle choice such as cigarette smoke or chemical abuse. Okay, looking at the health hazard versus health effects of EMF exposure, most of us would understand that the sun gives off radiation and we are advised to limit our exposure to reduce burning our skin, which is generally believed to, at the very least, be a negative effect to our healthy skin. It may or may not be linked conclusively to the health hazard of skin cancer. So why is it so hard to understand that long and maybe even continuous exposure to EMF radiation is not as safe as we have been led to believe? Just because it does not burn our skin surface like higher radiation frequencies do. At this point, I thought and looked up the spectrum, which would be useful. The electromagnetic spectrum, which at the lower end has things like what your computer would give off or power lines, going up the way to TV broadcasts, radio, microwaves. Then you get the visual where you actually can see the colored light, and going all the way to therapeutic and diagnostic, X-rays and gamma rays and those sort of things. So you can understand where your EMF exposure, and you get all of these, come in. If it's not an outright health hazard, then these devices clearly are having some health effects on us individually and as a society. Wouldn't you agree? Every day we are learning more about environmental impacts such as addiction to Facebook or other social media, or the high environmental cost of the chemicals used in or to make these devices. We are just assuming they are modern miracles guaranteeing a net plus to mankind, aren't we? For clarity, here is some health effects definition that I'm using. A health effect is defined as in the Free Medical Dictionary as follows. Health effects or health impact are changes in health resulting from exposure to a source. Health effects are an important consideration in many areas such as hygiene, pollution studies, occupational safety and health, nutrition, health sciences in general. Some of the major environmental sources of health effects are air pollution, water pollution, soil contamination, noise pollution, and over-illumination. Some health effects have a severity that is dependent on dose and is believed to have a threshold level for which no effect is seen, while other health effects occur by chance, generally occurring without a threshold level or dose, whose probability is proportional to the dose and whose severity is dependent on that dose, such as a cancer or a genetic effect. Occasionally, a lack of exposure to a certain effector has detrimental consequences on the individual's health. Examples of those effectors could include like sunlight or exercise even, end quote. Next, I decided to check out the quote-unquote ongoing research or investigations that I could find easily. The most recent news article I could find was as of April 2017, found on and it was titled Current Understanding of Health Effects of Electromagnetic Fields, end quote. This is an abstract article from the Pediatric Annals by Tayaya Mea and Dr. Deepak Kamat. And this is just an extract from the actual research that was published in this pediatric journal. So it's a good quality source of the research. The link will be in the show notes related to this story on my website. My takeaway of this study, in summary, comes down to this. This was a metadata study. In other words, the research studied a group of published research to date. And here's what you really need to get from this study of the studies in abstract. Americans, this is a quote, Americans are experiencing, quote, an exponential increase in electronic device use over the past few decades, end quote. Higher frequencies, waves of EMF have more energy than lower frequency waves and tend to be more harmful, end quote. An EMF activates cellular stress response and also causes breaks in the DNA strands, end quote. The consensus from multiple studies is there is no causal role of extremely low frequency EMFs in childhood cancers, including brain cancers, end quote. Well, I encourage you to do your own research, read this and other studies incomplete for yourself, and make your own determination on how this information may impact your healthy lifestyle. Going a little deeper, what does the NIH, or the National Institute of Health, say on the topic of cell phone specific EMFs? And here's how the NIH answers that question in summary. Quote, there are three main reasons why people are concerned that cell phones, also known as mobile or wireless telephones, might have potential to cause certain types of cancer and other problems. Number one, cell phones emit radio frequency energy, radio waves, in a form of non-ionized radiation from their antennas. Tissues nearest to the antenna can absorb this energy. Number two, the number of cell phone users has increased rapidly. As of December 2014, there were more than 327.5 million cell phone subscribers in the United States, according to the Cellular, Telecommunications, and Internet Association. This is nearly threefold increase from the 110 million users in 2000. Globally, the number of subscriptions is estimated by the International Telecommunications Union to be 5 billion. Over time, the number of cell phone calls per day, the length of each call, and the amount of time used cell phones have increased. However, improvements in cell phone technology have resulted in devices that have lower power outputs than the earlier model. For more information, they suggest that you check out the NIC fact sheet called Electromagnetic Fields and Cancer, and includes information on wireless local area networks, commonly known as Wi-Fi, cell phone base stations, and cordless phones, end quote. We do need to understand the cost and benefits of these gadgets. That is clear. How we live with these gadgets is critical to how we can benefit or what it may possibly cost us. For example, the NIH reports, quote, for household appliances and other devices used in the home that require electricity, magnetic field levels are the highest near the source of the field and decrease rapidly the farther away the user is from the source. Magnetic fields drop precipitously at the distance of about a foot from most appliances. For computer screens, at a distance of 12 to 20 inches from the screen that most persons using the computers sit, magnetic fields are similarly dramatically lower. Let's review what they say about common sources of exposure. Quote, human-made EMFs fall into both the ELF and radio frequency categories of non-ionizing part of the electromagnetic spectrum. These EMFs come from a number of sources. First, extremely low frequency EMFs, or ELF EMFs. Sources of sorry about that, that's my clock. I have a wind-up clock, so it doesn't add to my EMFs in my office. But it does ring the bell on the quarter hour. Sources of ELF EMFs include power lines, electrical wiring, electrical appliances such as shavers, hair dryers, and electric blankets. Radio frequency radiation. The most common sources of radio frequency radiation are wireless telecommunication devices and equipment, including cell phones, smart meters, and portable wireless devices such as tablets, laptops, etc. The United States cell phones currently operate on a frequency range of around 1.8 to 2.2 gigahertz. Other common sources of radio frequency include radio and television signals, AM, FM radio, and other VHF, UHF televisions operate at lower radio frequencies than cell phones. Radio signals are AM, which is amplitude modulated, or FM, frequency modulated. AM radio is used for broadcast over long distances, whereas FM radio covers more localized areas. AM signals are transmitted from large arrays of antennas that are placed in high elevations on sites that are off limits to the general public because exposure close to the source can be high. Maintenance workers who could receive substantial radio frequency exposure from AM radio antennas though the general public would not. FM antennas and TV broadcast antennas, which are much smaller than AM antennas, are generally mounted on the top of high towers. Radio frequency exposures near the base of the towers are below guideline limits, so exposure to the general population is very low. Sometimes small local radio or TV antennas are mounted on the top of buildings, and access to the roof of such buildings is usually controlled. Next up, radar, satellite stations, magnetic resonance machines, the MRI devices, and industrial equipment. These operate at somewhat higher radio frequencies than cell phones. And the microwave oven, used in homes, also operate at somewhat higher radio frequency than cell phones. Microwave ovens are manufactured with a shielding that has reduced the leakage of radio frequency radiation from these appliances to barely detectable levels. I think you need to test that to confirm that. Cordless telephones, which operate on analog or digital enhanced cordless telecommunications technology, and typically emit radio frequencies similar to those of cell phones. However, because cordless phones have a limited range and require a nearby base, their signal strengths are generally much lower than those of cell phones. The cell phone base station is antenna towers and base stations, including those for mobile phone networks, for broadcasting, for radio and television, emit various types of radio frequency energy. And because the majority of individuals in the general population are exposed only to intermittently to base stations and broadcast antennas, it is difficult to estimate exposures for population. The strength of these exposures varies based on the population density of the region, the average distance from the source, and the time of day or the day of the week. Lower exposures on the weekend or at night. In general, exposures decrease with increasing distance from the source. Exposures among maintenance workers have found to vary depending on their tasks, the type of antenna, and the location the worker in relation to the source. Cumulative exposures of such workers are very difficult to estimate. Television and computer screens. Well, they produce electric and magnetic fields at various frequencies, as well as static electric fields. The liquid crystal displays are found on some laptops, all laptops, and desktop computers. Many of them do not produce substantial electronic magnetic fields. Modern computers have conductive screens that reduce the static fields and produced by the screen to normal and or background levels. Don't you feel better? Wireless local area networks, commonly known as Wi-Fi. These are the type of wireless networking systems and are increasingly common exposure source for radio frequency radiation. Wireless networks use radio waves to connect Wi-Fi enabled devices to the access point that is connected to the internet, either physically or through some form of data connection. Most Wi-Fi devices operate at radio frequencies that are broadly similar to cell phones, typically that 2.4 to 2.5 gigahertz, although in recent years, Wi-Fi devices that operate at somewhat higher frequencies, like 5 or 5.3 or 5.8 gigahertz, have appeared. Radio frequency radiation exposure from Wi-Fi devices is considerably lower than that from cell phones. Both sources emit levels of radio frequency radiation that are far below the guidelines of 10, and I don't know what this is, large W/M2, as specified by the International Commission of Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. Finally, there is digital electronic and gas meters, also known as smart meters. I'll skip that section, not too many people have those. But when I look at that list, I realize that one of the things that we can all agree on is there is more and more radiation in our homes. Where the monitor might be getting less because of the flat panel, we've added more Wi-Fi. And we're about to enter the 5G world of the Internet of Things. And there's going to be transmissions not just between your Wi-Fi and your laptop or your tablet or your smartphone, but it's going to be talking to your refrigerator, your thermostat, your security system, your garage door, your lights, your TV, everything. Beyond the NIH, what do some leading alternative healthcare doctors have to say about the topic? Well, some doctors highly engaged in the EMF wellness programs, and one of the most common is Dr. Merkela's page, and I recommend that you check out his article on there related to electronic EMF devices and dangers. Another highly respected doctor is Dr. Michael Greger and his nutrition.org website. He looked at cell phone risks, and if you watch his show, you'll see in the transcript a very important question was asked. Do mobile phones cause cancer, end quote, he was asked. His response to this question was, quote, that's a question billions of people would like to have answered. And that's why we have the World Health Organization. They recognized authority on what is and what is not carcinogenic, end quote. He continues on with, there are 5 categories. There are the group 1 carcinogens, those we know with the highest level of certainty do cause cancer in human beings. Then there are things that probably cause cancer, possibly cause cancer, we're not sure, or probably don't cause cancer. Per his study, back in May 2011, 30 scientists in 14 countries met at the World Trade Organization, the WHO, to assess the carcinogenicity of the radiation emitted from cell phones, and concluded that given the limited amount of available evidence, cell phones are a possible human carcinogen. So, not a definitive human carcinogen, not a group 1 carcinogen known to be cancer-causing, like plutonium or processed meat, but a probable carcinogen, like DDT or Monsanto's Roundup pesticide, or some regular meat, but a possible carcinogen, down around something like vegetables, preserved vegetables like kimchi. An update with more recent information, he added, quote, evidence continues to mount, and the latest two 2017 systematic reviews showing between 33% increased odds of brain tumors with long-term use to 46% higher odds of tumors on the phone side of your head. And that's including the industrial-funded studies that have been accused of being biased and flawed, underestimating the risk, as opposed to the independent studies free from, quote, financial conditioning, end quote. And so he goes on, so scientists are pushing to have the IARC of the WHO bump cell phones up to probable carcinogens or even all the way to group 1, at least for brain cancer and acoustic neuromas, which is a type of inner ear tumor. But the WHO classification for cell phones currently remains at a possible carcinogen. Now, I really like Dr. Greger's simple and direct way he looks at health. After all, he is the author of How Not to Die, right? Here is what I mean on the EMF, aka radiation issue. He suggests, given the uncertainty, we could follow the precautionary principle and use, quote, simple personal measures to reduce our exposure, end quote. Like not putting the cell phone directly to our head all the time. That's the main concern about cell phones, holding it up to our head, right? Whereas there is no evidence of finger cancer risks, so text away. This is considered particularly important for children, by the way, he highlighted. Like most of the healthy lifestyle topics, risk is a matter of mostly choice. Avoiding all risk is 100% impossible. I find finding a balance where one understands they are personally responsible for the choices they make, which increases their body's exposure to risk, and the choice that reduce the risks. They are having alternative lifestyle choices that can easily be determined and implemented into a high quality and abundant life. Unfortunately, finding ways to suggest avoiding geopolitical thermonuclear radiation or intercontinental ballistic missile incoming is way above my pay grade. I therefore must fall back on my core values and universal principles. Can we live and let live? Should we pledge to do no harm to others? Don't judge, or you will be judged. And of course, let's always eat, pray, and love. Maybe we should learn to use our earphones with a microphone over talking with the phones on our heads. Build a protection between our microwave and ourselves when using them. Or just maybe we can learn how to turn off the electronics more often and put our feet back on the ground and work with the earth and not off the earth a little more often. I'm just saying. Well, that's a wrap. I went a little longer than I normally do. I hope you don't mind. I hope you get some value from this and you'll visit my website at ywnhmedia.com or the health coaching site at yourwellnessandhealth.com and the soon to be launched The Choice FM. The music we use at The Choice FM comes from zenmusiclibrary.com. We're recording this podcast today at the beautiful Carolina coast. All rights reserved. ywnhmedia.com. Have a good day.